Hey, sleepy friends. Cheers. My week's vacation is over. Tomorrow morning, I get to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go to work. But before I do that, I thought I'd give you some of my thoughts on some of the comics I read on my vacation. I'll do another. I've been trying to catch up on all the DC, but I'll do another video on some of the DC I read. So this is mostly indie stuff, I guess. Just a hodgepodge. And but before I dive into it, I want to give a shout out to the Frog Queen. I've been meaning to mention her. I usually wait for a sleepy vlog to mention new people or new people's channels I've discovered, new channels that are new to me that I've discovered. I'm not sure how long the Frog Queen has been doing it. I think she's been doing blogs about comics for a long time, is my impression, and maybe fairly recently started doing a lot of videos. But she covers a lot of interesting stuff, from manga to indie comics to, I think, some mainstream comics. I'm not even sure if she does that, but she but generally with a focus on the more indie stuff, I think. But another really interesting thing she does is, maybe just because she asks, or maybe because she has more of a foothold in doing that kind of thing, but she does interviews with professionals. I watched her interview with Brandon Graham and thought that was quite interesting. So she's a little different than anyone else. She's definitely a little different than anyone else's channel out there, and that makes her very interesting. And she tagged me in a tag to show my 10 favorite modern comics. But it's gonna be a while till I can do that tag, so I wanted to shout her out. Just because I haven't had a chance to, still haven't really unpacked anything comic book wise since my move. Since I got back from the main part of my holiday, I've done painting at the old house. It goes on sale on the market next weekend. So maybe after that I will start organizing my life over here. So anyway, one of the things I read and somehow was looking forward to was Bullwhip #1. I don't, it may be that all the comics in this line of comics will be #1. It's called All Time Comics, and it's from Fantagraphics. Like 2 weeks ago, it was the Crime Destroyer, which I did not like very much. Well, I didn't like the writing on it very much. And they published it on this newsprint and with this garish coloring. I guess, and generally it evokes Bronze Age comics mostly. And it was suggested to me on Twitter by Ryan. Can't remember the rest of Ryan's name. That these are purposefully lame. Like, that's their spoofiness, is their lameness, in mirroring the lameness of some of the bad comics of the Bronze Age, I guess. And I guess that made sense on Crime Destroyer, and there's some of that here. This time Benjamin Marra does the pencils, and the inks are by a longtime Marvel artist named Al Milgrom, who did a lot of inking and some penciling during the Bronze Age, and I think he was also kind of a major editor over at Marvel. So it's interesting to see him back. The effect, I think, because Marra's pencils are pretty simplistic, it kind of reminds me, if anyone out there remembers Don Perlin and his work on things like The Defenders. He was one of the, I imagine he was very good at hitting deadlines and stuff, but he was one of the most bland pencilers at Marvel. But it kind of works here. I don't know. It might, I would argue that maybe a different artistic approach would serve the script better. But anyway, I liked this a lot more than I liked Crime Destroyer. It had lame bits, but it it had hints of fun complications and fun, silly things, like a future ruled by vampires, with a time-traveling vampire coming who has to turn a certain princess into a vampire so that she, if she becomes a vampire, then his vampire empire will exist in the future, and if she doesn't, he fails. And there's some kind of inventive kinkiness with the bad guy, likes to be whipped. One of the bad guys, called the misogynist, actually likes to be whipped by the woman Bullwhip. And there's other sort of bizarro characters just thrown in, and I did kind of like the feeling, even though this is called issue number 1, it felt like when you picked up a Marvel comic back in the day, in the 70s or 80s, and you were always thrown in the middle of some sequence of events and had to kind of pick up on it. Actually, I'm kind of digging the art more as I look through it more again. It's like it's growing on me. And there's something kind of cool about the way they color it, although on a lot of pages the color, and this is gorier stuff here than you would see in the Bronze Age, at least in the color Bronze Age comics, maybe in the black and white comics. But there's a goofiness to the goriness. Anyway, so it's kind of as I'm talking about it here that I'm growing to like this comic more. There was a little bit of visual inventiveness of how they beat the bad guy at the end. So I kind of would dig it if this series continued, if this Bullwhip series continued. Maybe the writer is getting more into a groove, at least from my point of view, than he was in the last issue. Still could be, it feels like a concept that even much more could be done with in the spoofing of this era of comics. And yeah, but it feels more promising to me. I don't know how long Fantagraphics plans to go on with this, if it'll just, all amount to a trade's worth. It reminds me a bit of the, I think it's called the 1963 series that Alan Moore did in the early 90s at Image, where he was kind of lovingly spoofing the early Marvel Silver Age comics. But I'd have to reread those. It's been a long time since I've read those. I've been meaning to reread them. I'd love to do a video about them someday. And I guess before I was kind of connecting it to Black Hammer and to Astro City, but those things are more in love with the Silver and Bronze Age, and the love here for the Silver and Bronze Age is more twisted, you might say. Completely different subject. Green Valley. Let's see which one of these. Actually, this is 5 and 7. But so I read number 7, and our heroes are making their comeback. They have more information. That there's some fun bits that play on the attempt to tell a medieval person about time travel, and the characters accidentally give the names of a bunch of movies like Back to the Future and stuff. I can't find that right now. But so I continue to really enjoy Green Valley. It's light, pulpy fun. It's very Hollywood. And I know that the writer, Landis, is a Hollywood script writer, an annoying person on his YouTube videos, but anyway, an egotistical guy. But he spins a fun little yarn here with time travel and the Middle Ages and the like. I'm not sure if it'll be made into a movie someday, but I could certainly imagine it. Okay, and I have a whole bunch of Flintstones issues here. The most recent was number 10. Flintstones is, as you read it more and think about it, it's kind of amazing. For those people who haven't heard me talk about the Flintstones before, or haven't heard other people talk about it, it's not at all like the TV show, but it uses all the elements, like animals as bowling balls and animals as utilities, the relationships of the boss to the worker and stuff like that. But anyway, as I've been reading a lot of them, it's amazing all the different tones it strikes, from sentimental and sad to really broad satire to subtly spoofing things that maybe are over my head at times. Like when in the most recent issue, there's a bunch of stuff about Werner Herzog, the German art film director who makes an appearance here. Another recurring character is someone who is clearly Carl Sagan. It's kind of interesting that, because how current is Werner Herzog and Carl Sagan? That seems like 80s stuff. There are certainly names I'm familiar with, especially Carl Sagan, and I've seen some Werner Herzog movies, but not in years. I don't think I ever understood a single Werner Herzog film. Fitzcarraldo, no, what was that what it's called? The one about the guy dragging the ship over the mountains. That's the one I always remember. He also did an interesting remake of Nosferatu, if I'm thinking of the right director. Anyway, totally off target. But the way your emotions go, I mean, sometimes it's kind of obvious jokes about consumerism or the politics of spending in the military and that kind of thing. Clearly from a left point of view, although I think he's certainly spoofing a lot of things, like the consumerism that people from many different points of view might enjoy seeing spoofed. And, we have aliens appear, and it's just all kinds of interesting things. It's amazing that you can just flow and it doesn't feel unnatural the way all these things connect together. And I think issue 9 was the peak for me. There's 2 more issues to go, but so far of the 10 issues, issue 9 just hit me emotionally. The core of the story was as much about the animals who are the tools and utilities in the Flintstones house, and the sentimentality there really worked for me and played nicely with a morality play that the really rich Mr. Slate, is that what he's called? The boss of Fred's boss, who joins a religion that's all about being selfish, but in the end he gets lonely and takes back his turtle. And then issue 10 is very powerful too. So 9 and 10, the focus seems to become very intense, and there's a horrifying death here that is very sentimental, and yet at the same time, I want to kind of spoil it, but I know there's a lot of people out there who'll probably be reading these in trades later. But there's an interesting thing where what kills the character may be something really gross. I think he wanted to say something more about film and the culture of film than I totally grasped here. But yeah, the last 2, 9 and 10, have just been really good. All of them have been good, but 9 and 10, the focus. So, and I feel like one of the emotional cores based on the character that's killed in issue 10 kind of feels like this should be the last issue. Are the last 2 issues going to be kind of an emotional coda, or where are we going to place our emotions next? That'll be interesting to see. This is planned only as a 12-issue miniseries. The writer is going to be doing Snagglepuss as a gay playwright in 1950s Greenwich Village during the McCarthy era, I think. It's hard to see that having... I mean, this is obscure enough, using the Flintstones for all this social satire plus weird emotional experiences. But to work on Snagglepuss and the 1950s gay playwright, that's really getting kind of deep into the bushes, I would think. But we'll see if he can pull it off. And if he can get enough of an audience to follow him so that the Snagglepuss thing will go 12 issues too, hopefully. Well, okay, completely different than, just going, what's in this stack here, than Flintstones is I read the last 2 issues of Birthright. Although it, emotionally has a strong component with all these different notes about family relationships, parents and children, evil parents, good children, evil children, good parents. I thought there'd be nothing more to do with the wife who thought her husband had killed the child, but she's coming back as an interesting character. We're getting more visions of both the magic in our world and the magic in the other world, Terranos. The art is really, really strong in here. The color is incredible. Oh, that's a disturbing page. So I'm really enjoying Birthright and reading 2 issues in a row. It's probably going to, I have not heard someone talk about reading it in trade, but I imagine it's a really good trade read. But it's still only $2.99. It's really a worthwhile monthly read for me. One I look forward to a lot. It's kind of depressing, but and I can't imagine things turning out too well for all these characters. But it's very rich, very, very rich. But talk about depressing. I shotgunned the whole of The Goddamned on a plane ride, or just, maybe it took me less than an hour to read this, or an hour on the plane. And it's so depressed. This is The Goddamned, the first volume by Jason Aaron and R.M. Guerrera and Julia Brusco doing the colors. And the colors are pretty wild, pretty effective. But, Jason Aaron is true to his idea of how awful must the world have been before God washed it away with the flood. So he's looking at that world, but we also get a really awful Noah. But Noah knows that everyone's going to be washed away and die, so why should he have any sympathy for them? And he knows they're all damned by God except for himself. So again, why should he have any caring or sympathy for those people? It's an interesting experiment to try to really envision these kind of gaps within the Bible. Hang on a second. Okay, awkward transition. I ran off, but I was in the middle of talking about goddamn. I'm trying to remember what I said. But yeah, it's an interesting proposition, but what Jason Aaron came up with is, Jason Aaron and the artist, no doubt, is so endlessly brutal, and the final cut at the end, just when hope is growing, took me very much by surprise, despite everything else, and just like deepened the depressingness of everything. But given the fact that God is going to wash it all away, and what the essence of the Bible story is, I guess, it fits. It has to go that way. But the choice to just, I don't know. I think on Twitter I said something like it was like being hit with a bag of blood and bones repeatedly. It was just too much in a way in a trade. Maybe it would be better to have read this monthly. I don't know, and get little bits of depression at a time. One thing that's occurred to me when, a lot of the image indie stuff, very talented creators, many of whom have done a lot of work with superheroes, with mainstream work, and that this is their other work, is the superhero genre is inherently hopeful. You can go dark for a while, but I think you inevitably have to come back to a hopeful, strength of human spirit, positiveness. That's why people are superheroes. So, even in something like this, that's all jaded about superheroes and making fun of them to a degree, and making them kinky, or, whatever, spoofing them in whatever way, it has kind of a positive message at its core. This woman Bullwhip is trying to help people and save people. But like a lot of Rick Remender things are very depressing. Even Birthright, which compared to this is a cheerful book, is at its core a very depressing kind of book. So maybe that's why I like to come back to superheroes, because they will have that positive vibe. Yeah. I can't decide whether I'll read another volume of this. I think I've heard Jason Aaron say that each volume will focus on a different character during this period. I don't know how much more there is to say after this first volume. Maybe there's a new interesting angle on Noah, a different version of Noah than what we got in this book, where, he is infuriatingly brutal and evil, except for the fact that God's on his side, because of his knowledge of everything. But yeah, this is all a horror show. It's cannibalism and rape and torture and pain and betrayal and nothing else. So, and conveniently right after it, I have a pile of 3 superhero comics I read while on vacation, which was Faith from Valiant, number 6, number 7, and number 8. And I thoroughly enjoyed these. I think the writer, Jody Houser, who was decent at the beginning of the Faith series, has gotten stronger. It's still, the focus is not on like the most complicated plots or anything, and often the stories last for 2 issues, which I really appreciate. The character of Faith is developing, but is always remains true to that core of who she is, and she's very positive. There's even an interesting conversation with her and another character who claims to be kind of, I can't find it right in front of me, but claims to be kind of the negative one, and they discuss, she discusses reasons why Faith may be positive, whether she's clueless or, whether, discusses different reasons why she might be positive. And there's a new main artist. They kind of switch artists, so I guess this one does not have him. But starting with issue 7, then they have Joe Eisma. I think he was. They still have. So here, I think we can compare the Eisma to the Marguerite Sauvage. Does kind of these fantasy sequences. So there's Eisma and there's Sauvage. But Eisma does a really nice job, and the coloring, the colorist, whoever's doing the colors here, colorist Andrew Dahlhaus does a really good job complementing and working with Eisma's kind of almost minimalistic line style. So yeah, it's just a really fun, positive experience to read this. So I'm really happy with Faith. I can't find issue. So I've got up to issue 8. I can't find issue 9. I must have it somewhere, and then I have issue 10. So I haven't read issue 10 yet. But if you're looking for a fun superhero, I think, Faith is a sure bet. Because the stories aren't long, it's easy to jump in on. And it's fun if you find back issues or trades. But yeah, I recommend that for anyone who likes superheroes. And kind of a more low-key superhero kind of thing, rather than the big epics that Marvel, in particular, and DC to an extent, feel like they have to do. Speaking of DC, I can mention some comics I couldn't get all the way through. This All-Star Batman now, it's pretty old. I bought it a while back, but I didn't get around to reading it. It has fantastic art by Jock, and really nice coloring. I assume Jock did the coloring too. I can't find the credits right away. But I hate the way it's written. With this kind of typed looking text, even the font kind of turned me off. And the distancing from the story and the point of view, I think it's all narration from inside Batman's head. I think one of the things I never liked too much about... No, Matt Hollingsworth is the color, so the colors are really good. Never liked too much about Scott Snyder is when he got too deep into Batman's head. Either because he didn't capture Batman the way I'd like him to, or just the idea of too much of Batman's thinking in general, for me, is wrong for that character, and he needs to be a more distanced, more stoic, non-chatty kind of character. But I can't even... I just got so bored of reading it, I just stopped reading it. Maybe I'll go back. Because one of the nice things... Oh, and look, there's another story at the back I need to read. Oh, I did read it, with Francisco Francavilla. And I found this was better to read because it was more traditional comic book dialogue and very creative visuals from Francavilla. And yet, I can't really remember what happened in it. So maybe I should reread that. And then, this is a 6-issue miniseries, and I already have 3 issues of it before I read it, and I couldn't get through issue 1. I think it's kind of the language, and in this case the art doesn't help that much, or the coloring particularly didn't work for me. But the writing, at first I thought, oh cool, he's trying to evoke kind of the Odyssey and the Iliad and that kind of writing. But then it just became annoying and not pointless, but like a person who doesn't have the right storytelling skills and is telling the wrong parts of the story and going in depth in the wrong things and not keeping the story moving along in a good fashion at all. And maybe, I mean, it seems a horrible waste, and I probably will be getting all 6 issues unless I cancel it quickly with my comic book dealer. But and the other thing is I really loved the idea of kind of a sword and sorcery, sword and sandals adventure with the Amazons in pre-Wonder Woman days. Covers kind of get me interested. But one interesting concept in here was that there are immortal women warriors sort of scattered around the world, and the Amazons go on these trips to go find them, and that kind of explains why you get Amazons of not just Greek background, but African background or Asian background. And I thought that was a really cool concept. But it was just too hard to read, at least because I had plenty of other stuff to read. And when you're reading while you're traveling too, you're kind of cramped in uncomfortable spaces and stuff. And if the book or the comic can't sweep you away and make you forget about where you are, then you move on and you read something else. So I think that's all I've got in front of me at the moment. Hope everyone's been having a good comic book week, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye bye.